Hello and welcome everyone to Brainy Days. I'm Nicole Boggins. I'm a research assistant professor in biomedical science in the FAU College of Medicine. And I'm also the director of community engagement and programming for the FAU Brain Institute. Today, I'm very excited to open our Brainy Days community lecture series with Dr. Gregory Berns. Brainy Days is an annual month-long celebration of neuroscience in honor of National Brain Awareness Week in March. Dr. Berns is our first guest in our community program, and earlier this week, he was also the first for our series for scientists, which was fantastic. Thank you again, Dr. Berns, for joining us today. Just a quick note for all of our attendees, there will be a Q&A session following Dr. Berns' talk. Please type your questions in the Q&A button on your Zoom control bar, which can be found on the bottom toolbar to the right. And the chat button has been disabled, so please do not use the chat button. Instead, just use the Q&A button and all questions will be answered during the Q&A session. So I'm going to start off our programming by introducing Dr. Randy Blakely. He is full professor also in the FAU College of Medicine, and he is the executive director of the FAU Brain Institute pillar. Dr. Blakely?
Thank you, Nicole. Well, hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to join you for yet another Brainy Days program. This is now our fourth in a series that we've enjoyed providing community education programming on neuroscience topics ranging from, as you'll see them in our program this year, from fundamental neuroscience to fun topics for kids to things that are of more serious nature in brain diseases. The Brain Institute at Florida Atlantic University consists of more than 70 faculty level researchers, their trainees and staff, all working to understand how the brain is built, how it develops, how it matures, and how it ages, and how we can make the most of that full process for a healthy life and healthy mental health. We've invested significantly over the past 5 years in recruiting top flight faculty to Florida Atlantic University on multiple campuses. We have our home on the Jupiter campus, Jupiter, Florida campus of Florida Atlantic University, and as well have very sizable representation and an education office on the Boca Raton campus, the home for Florida Atlantic University. We are also heavily invested in our community and have a number of community education programs that are ongoing throughout the year. And if you're interested in exploring those, I suggest you check out our website at ibrain.fau.edu and look under the community tab. One of our newest programs that I hope you'll be seeing around if you live in the area is our Mobile Minds program, which involves an opportunity for us to bring neuroscience out to schools and community centers. So look for that. Now, I wanted to mention in particular our major sponsor, Palm Health Foundation. Palm Health Foundation has been working with the Brain Institute since 2018 to provide educational programming to the Palm Beach County community. And we're delighted to have their sponsorship again this year. The Palm Health Foundation and its Brain Health Initiative are leading a charge to increase brain health locally and shine a light on what we know can be achieved. With local partners, Palm Health Foundation has been investing in bringing new research and educational programming to the community and providing opportunities for trainees to develop into the next generation of healthcare professionals and neuroscientists. We've been excited to work with them on a number of initiatives, and in particular, a computational neuroscience investment that we hope to realize in the coming year. If you're interested in the programs of Palm Health Foundation, please see their website at www.palmhealthfoundation.org. I'd also like to note several other of our sponsors, and these include the South Florida Science Center and Aquarium, Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, and the Dana Foundation. And I'll stop sharing my screen. Great, thank you. So I'm really delighted to have Dr. Berns with us today. I think his work is not only exciting from a scientific perspective, but I think it is one of the, it deals with a topic that will reach into all of our hearts, and that some of us even at FAU also pursue research in. Today's host for Dr. Berns' lecture is Dr. Cheryl Krause-Parello. She's professor in the College of Nursing, and she's director of the Canines Providing Assistance to Wounded Warriors program, or C-P.A.W. Dr. Krause-Parello will be moderating the presentation introducing Dr. Berns, and then after Dr. Berns' lecture, she'll also give you some highlights about her own research, which involves the interactions between humans and canines, and how that mutual interaction can support brain health. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Krause-Parello to introduce our speaker.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Blakely. Really appreciate it. I'm really excited to be hosting this event today, and I appreciate the warm welcome. And so I'd like to get started and introduce our speaker, Dr. Gregory Berns. Dr. Berns is a professor in the psychology department and also the director of the MRI Center, Facility for Education and Research in Neuroscience at Emory University. Dr. Berns' current research uses functional MRIs to study canine cognitive function in awake, unrestrained dogs. The goals of these projects are to non-invasively map the perceptual and decision-making of the dog's brain and to predict likelihood of success in service dogs. He also uses diffusion tensor imaging to reconstruct the white matter pathology of a wide variety of other mammals, including dolphins, sea lions, coyotes, and extinct Tasmanian tiger. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Berns, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, it's great to be here and great to be kicking off these series of talks, and I think it'll be exciting for everyone. So I will dive right in. This afternoon is going to be all about dogs. So I hope everyone is, if not a dog person, at least a dog lover. And my apologies to the cat people out there. There will be no cats in this presentation. So I'm going to share my screen and hopefully this will go. Good. You heard a little bit about me. Before I dive into this, I just want to say a little bit about how I got started in this area, which really didn't exist until I started messing around with it. For most of my career, I have been a neuroscientist using brain imaging technologies to study human decision-making, specifically things like reward and punishment, and how we weigh risk and reward, and how the brain integrates those types of things. And then about 10 years ago, I really was essentially looking at one of my dogs and just wondering, what he thought. And the thought occurred to me, well, why can't we use the same tools that we use to study human cognition, all the modern neuroscience tools that we use non-invasively, specifically things like brain imaging, and why couldn't we use that with dogs? Dogs are very trainable, and in many ways, they're the perfect animal to study because they live with us. In fact, they are the first and maybe the only animal that really truly shares our social environment. And so that started what eventually I just started calling the Dog Project. And it was originally just very much a side project to my main research. And over time, actually fairly quickly, it became the main thing that I do. Now to this point, this is at this point now 10 years later after we started, is the only thing that I do. And some people have said I have the best job in neuroscience, where I get to spend my days with dogs. I won't argue with that. You can see a couple of the books that I've written on this topic. If you're interested, they're available at the usual outlets. The first one, How Dogs Love Us, is really the story of how this project got going. And it is as much a family story as much as a science mystery. The second one is more science oriented. So if you're more into the science side of what I'm going to talk about, then I recommend the second book, What It's Like to Be a Dog, because that has more science in it than the first one. So to dive right in, what I want to talk about is the problem of animal emotions. And so I use this slide from Gary Larson's Far Side, which is how to recognize the moods of an Irish setter, which I crossed out and I just replaced with golden retriever, mainly because I haven't seen an Irish setter since I was a little kid, and this cartoon works perfectly well for golden retrievers as well. I've had golden retrievers, so I say that with love. The question that seems to bedevil scientists, and has since Darwin's time, really. Darwin was one of the first to really bring up this question, is, do animals have emotions? And this may seem like a silly question, especially if you have a dog or a cat or live with animals. Most everyone who lives with animals would say, absolutely, of course animals have emotions. But demonstrating that scientifically is a whole nother thing. And so this is my little foray into that, and specifically about dogs. So what evidence do we have about animal emotions? I mean, apart from just our own projection, what we call anthropomorphism, it seems like, you know, this dog here is grabbing this Frisbee, and anyone who's seen dogs do this, you can't help but be impressed by just their love of doing that activity. They just are totally into it. And then at the other end of this spectrum, you don't have to be a dog expert to recognize that this dog is not in a happy place. We're not really sure. Is it sadness? Is it anxiety? Is it fear? We're not sure, but we can say it's not joy. And so, you know, it seems on the surface that dogs, and probably all animals, have, you know, at least these basic dimensions of emotion. And then there's something like this. What would we call that? Is that loyalty? Is that love? Is it feed me? We don't really know. All we have is our own intuitions to go on, to intuit that. And I don't discount human intuition at all. I think that is, in fact, the source of many scientific discoveries. And doing the science is often done, in essence, to confirm one's intuitions about the observations that we make. So, in fact, I do believe that animals have emotions, and I believe that dogs, in fact, have quite a range of emotions that are probably very similar to ours. And so what I want to tell you about is how I've gone about approaching this question and the results that we've found. The first question, I think, to put it bluntly, is this: is it all a scam? Do dogs act the way they do just to get food and shelter from us? Or do they genuinely have feelings for us in something that resembles the way that we have feelings towards each other? I think that's the heart of the question that many dog owners want to know. To boil it down, does my dog love me? And when I say that, love me not for just the treats I give him or her, but just for the relationship itself. And so that's really what I'm going to talk about, and how we can approach that scientifically. So before I get to the dogs, it's worth pointing out, well, how would you answer that question for a human? It's difficult, right? How do we know what a person is thinking? Well, there's really only two ways to know. We can ask the person, what are you thinking? And we will depend on them to give us a truthful answer. That is, even if they know the answer themselves. Sometimes we're not aware of our own feelings, or the rationales for the things that we do. So the presumption is that we have access to our own thoughts. That is only partially true. Sometimes we do, and sometimes we don't. And then whether we want to share them with another person is yet another question. So then the only other way that we can have access to what a person is thinking is by observing their actions. So what you do. When it comes to an animal, like a dog, the what you say is off the table. So even though we talk to our dogs and we may have the sense that they understand us, they don't talk back to us. Now, be clear about this, talking is not the same as communication. So animals most definitely communicate with us as well as others, but not with our words. They do not use speech or language like we do. So that leaves us in this conundrum. If we want to know what a dog is thinking, we have historically been left with what they do, observing their actions. This is where I kind of come into the story using the tool that I've used for now probably 2.5 decades, which is an MRI scanner. And this is a picture of our scanner being installed in the psychology building. And so it looks like a jet engine. And if you've been inside one, it kind of sounds like a jet engine too. And the goal here is to bypass this constraint that an animal can't speak and go directly to their brains to try to decode, if you will, what it is that they're thinking and feeling using exactly the same methods that we use for humans. So what might we find in there if we go looking around? And I can't remember where I found this cartoon, but I still enjoy it. I guess just my juvenile sense of humor. But anyway, this might be something you might expect to see in a dog's brain. Okay, so I want to tell you how we did this and then get into some of our findings that we've discovered. But before I do that, I do want to be clear how and why we're doing this. I've covered a little bit of the why. When I started thinking about training my dog to go in an MRI scanner, I view my dogs as family members, as probably many people do. And so because of that, I would not do anything to hurt a family member, and I would not do anything to hurt any of my dogs. So any of the dogs that are participating in the study are not harmed in any way. In fact, they have complete control of whether they want to participate. So we don't restrain them, we don't use physical restraints, and we don't sedate them or use any kind of anesthesia at all. So they are completely awake, unrestrained. They're not even leashed because you can't have a leash in the scanner. You can't have a collar in the scanner. So they are there of their own free will. We use only positive reinforcement methods, meaning positive treats and food and praise. And in essence, we try to make this a fun activity for everyone. And then we use community dogs. So these are people in Atlanta who have volunteered to participate in this project with their dogs. And we've been teaching now for the last 10 years, holding classes on how to train your dog for an MRI scanner. There are challenges to doing this, no doubt. There are challenges that are the same for humans. The biggest one being is you can't move inside the scanner. If you've had one, you know the MRI tech says, don't move. Easier said than done, because frankly, an MRI scanner is often an anxiety-provoking place for humans, and for dogs, it may also be anxiety-provoking because it's novel. They haven't been there before. At least the first time they go there, they haven't seen it. It's enclosed, which in humans causes claustrophobia. Turns out in dogs, the dogs don't care as much about that. But the next item, the fact that the patient table is elevated, they do care about. So this is like we're asking the dogs to go up on a table, which is quite narrow, really a little more than a foot wide, about 3 feet off the floor. And they have to get used to that. So what I'm going to show you is how we train the dogs to do this and get them acclimated to the environment. And then finally, it's also very loud. So if you've had one, you know it sounds like a jackhammer. And so we have to get the dogs used to that. We give them ear protection the same as we would a human. Then that means teaching them to wear earmuffs and earplugs. And it's a process, but it's not rocket science. So when I started this was literally 10 years ago now. My dog was the first participant in this. So my dog's Callie. She's a little rat terrier who was adopted from the Humane Society shelter. And then the other first participant was a border collie named Mackenzie. And I'm going to show you a short training video that we made when we started this. Mainly, we were just documenting what we were doing without really any expectation that anything would come of it. Sometimes this crashes, so if it crashes, I will come back and other folks will fill in till I come back. So we often use this video when new people join the project to show them what they're in for and kind of how the process plays out. So this is Mark Spivak. He's the dog trainer I've worked with throughout this project. And this is Callie. At the time, she was about 1.5 years old. She had no particular skills. She probably had failed obedience, mainly my fault for just not being diligent about it. Because you can see here, she very readily likes to work, trying to learn what Mark's teaching her. And he's using something called clicker training, which is just a form of positive reinforcement. He's giving her treats to try to go into this mock-up of what is a simulation of a part of an MRI scanner. Excellent. So here's Mackenzie. Now Mackenzie was already well trained in agility, and you'll see this is a piece of cake for her.
Yeah, basically we're looking for the brain things, the brain case to be in the center of it, right there. That's it.
What I hope you take away from these videos is the dogs are just doing this as just any other trick or thing you might teach them to do. It's really no different than that. You see how good Mackenzie is. She's got this classic border collie stare. So we quickly realized that, okay, well, the dogs are okay with going into this little brain coil cage, but we need to give them something to put their head on. And so this was our first attempt at that, just a little foam bar.
Perfect. Yes.
Mackenzie, it's again, piece of cake. She's like, what do you want me to do? And the reason I show these videos is to show what working with animals in research can be. I strongly believe that this can be a collaborative relationship where the animals are as much a partner in it as anything. So this is probably after a couple of weeks. This is me and Callie working in the basement, in my basement. And that noise you hear is just a audio recording of what the scanner sounds like. It's played at low volume right now, and we will gradually increase the volume over time just to get her used to it. So this is maybe a month or so. We are now at a real scanner, and you notice we put some steps there, and I am trying to coax her up those steps to walk into the scanner herself. I do not want to place her there. I want her to have control of the environment so that she walks in, she knows she can walk out. You can tell from the tail wags that She's not stressed. She's enjoying this.
Excellent. Very good.
On the second trial, Callie went right up the stairs.
And this is the end result. This is probably after about 2, maybe 3 months at most of really working no more than about 10 minutes a day. We've changed the chin support so it now fits her muzzle. We've trained her to wear earmuffs. And now I'm using hand signals to communicate with her. And the reason I'm doing that is, one, for scientific reasons, which I'm going to show you in a second, but also because the scanner's loud and I need a way to communicate with her over the noise of the scanner. So there are 2 hand signals I'm giving. One hand up means you're going to get a treat, a hot dog. And then 2 hands like this means nothing. Nothing's going to happen. And you can see she's holding absolutely still. Maybe better even than our human subjects. So that's how you train a dog to do this. Here are just a few cheesecake shots of what it looks like. You'll see some of the dogs, we wrap their heads. That's just to keep the ear protection in place is all. So she has earmuffs on under there. Some of the dogs have earplugs. This is what it looks like from the other end. This dog's name is Ohana. This dog's name is Will, and this is what we're always aiming for after a session, is just a happy dog with a bunch of happy people and good data. Here's another video, just 20-second video. This is a different dog. This dog's name is Tug, Portuguese water dog. It looks really easy, doesn't it? And with the right dog, it can be. This is with the scanner running. Okay. So we started with what we eventually called the A team. And then when we realized this was definitely possible, then we started expanding, putting out word of mouth, expanding to the community. Hey, we're holding MRI class every other Sunday. We would hold tryouts because we also quickly learned that it was not in anyone's benefit to take all comers, that we developed a tryout process to screen dogs out who we knew were either too anxious or didn't even have basic obedience. And we didn't want to waste our time and their time trying to train them for something like this. So this just kind of gives you a snapshot of the dogs over the years. We've now trained over 100 dogs to do this. Okay, so on to the science. So quick picture about brain anatomy, dog on left, human on right. This is not to scale. Dog brain is about the size of a lemon at best if it's a medium to large size dog. And if it's a small dog, well, you're probably talking like walnut size. The point is, though, that there's a lot of similarities that you can see there. There's a structure called the cerebellum, which is like that cauliflower thing. There's the brainstem going into the spinal cord. And then the real differences, we think, are in the cortex, that folded part of the brain. And apart from the size difference, the raw size difference, the biggest difference is that in humans, it's more folded. And what that means is more surface area and just more neurons crammed into a tight space. So humans have a lot of neural real estate, so we can do a lot of things that dogs can't. And what we're trying to understand then is in the dog's brain, in their anatomy, what can they do? What can they understand? How do they process the world? And then what are the similarities and differences to human processing of those things? And this is just a different view. This is looking top down. So you can see the eyeballs at the top of the dog's brain. And that arrow is pointing to a structure called the caudate nucleus, which turns out to be the heart of the reward system. It's the area of the brain that has the densest concentration of dopamine receptors. And the nice thing about that is that it seems to be highly conserved across all species, all mammalian species. So it's very easy to identify seems to serve very similar functions in every species that it's been studied in. So this is where we started our journey into the dog's brain. As I showed in the video, we had begun using hand signals where I hold up one hand, which means reward, you're going to get a treat, versus two hands like this, which means nothing is going to happen. Part of that was for communication, but there was a scientific reason. This, at its core, is what Pavlov studied 100 years ago. He used a bell. We're just using a visual signal. So the idea is that when I hold up my hand, the dog knows they're going to get a treat, and that creates a state of anticipation for that treat. And the nice thing about that is we know that that is processed through the reward system of every animal that's been studied. And so we just wanted to see if that was the same in dogs. We had no reason to expect that it wouldn't be, but this was at this stage at the beginning was just a proof of concept. If we didn't find it there, then we knew something was wrong with what we were doing. But in fact, we did find it. This is on the left is a top view of the dog's brain. And you sometimes see these colored maps in brain imaging studies where red or the hotter colors means there's more intense activity and the cooler colors mean less activity. And so these hot spots are exactly where you would expect them to be. And this is in response to these two hand signals. It's not in response to the treat. We would love to image the response to the treat itself, but we can't do that because when the dog is eating the treat, their head is moving and we can't get any good data during that period. So all of the experiments are designed to look at what the dog is processing when they're not moving their head. So just looking at these hand signals. So this is great. This gives us a target, shows us that the technique works. This was done in about 12 dogs. So this was later on after the initial proof of concept. And it shows that, yes, we can map the reward system. It responds as expected to food. We all know dogs love food, but what about more complicated things? What about the emotions that I mentioned originally? Okay, so for that, this was actually several years after we started, we come to the praise versus food experiment. And so here's a short video. And the way this is going to work, this dog's name is Katie. And it's very similar, except we're not going to use hand signals in this experiment. And the idea is to look at the anticipation to either a food reward or just an owner popping into view and just praising the dog, just the social contact and the praise. And so what you're going to see is three objects held up in this video. You can see a hairbrush held up, which is our neutral condition. Nothing happens after the hairbrush. Then you'll see a pink car. These are just toys on sticks. That'll be held up, and then the owner will pop into view and praise the dog. And then you'll see a blue horse. And after that cue, a treat will come in. We call it the treat kebab because it's held off out of view of the dog. So it just kind of comes in as a disembodied treat because we're trying to separate it from the human. So let me show you what this looks like. She's so good at this, you can't even tell it's still rolling.
Yay, good girl.
All right, so I defy anyone to tell me what she's thinking at this point. And then comes the treat kebab. Okay, so that's what happens when we're actually in the scanner. And what we're going to look at is the response to those two cues that signal either praise or treat. Before I tell you what we found, though, what we realized is we kind of needed another, not quite a gold standard, but at least some kind of behavioral measure of whether the dog actually likes treats or praise. Some dogs, actually do prefer praise. At least we think they do. So we devised this equivalent of the Pepsi challenge for dogs. There's a dog, this dog's Ohana, behind that door. And then we set up this V maze. So they come out of the door and then they have to make a decision. Do I go to the owner who's facing away from the dog and just get pet and praised? Or do I go to the food bowl, which you see that yellow food bowl on the left? There's a treat in there, and we familiarize the dogs with this setup. And so we do this, and I'll show you what it looks like. Great, so owner's happy, dog picked her over the food, but let's do it again. So we actually did this for each dog 20 times, flip-flopping the sides that the owner and the food bowl were on. So there you have it. Ambiguous, right? Well, you can add up, you can just tally up how many times they went to the owner, how many times they went to the food. But actually, it turned out what was more interesting was the pattern that they did it in. So some dogs were what I would call samplers. They would go kind of food, human, 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 food, human. They just kind of go back and forth on successive trials. And then other dogs were what I would call more perseverative, meaning that they would stick with one thing for a while and then maybe they would switch. So they would go human, 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 food, 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 and they just kind of stick with it after a while. And then we can actually kind of calculate from that their tendencies to stay with one or the other and actually use that as a measure of which one they behaviorally prefer, and then see if that correlates with what their brain response is to those cues. I'll get to this in a second. So what I will tell you, what we found is that in fact, the reward system response in the dog's brain to those cues, now I'm talking about the horse and the pink car, correlates with their behavioral tendency to prefer their owner or the food bowl. And so why is this important? Well, it turns out that the majority of dogs, about 75% of the dogs that we studied, had an equal or greater response to praise as to food. And this was in their brain, suggesting that, in fact, that for the majority of dogs, that praise is a form of reward as valuable as food itself to the dog. And so I think this is very comforting to us who have dogs, that it's not all about the food, that they do have kind of a genuine reward response to just the social bond itself. And it also has a very practical application when training dogs to do things. Even though food is considered kind of the primary reinforcer and the most commonly used tool to train dogs, it's not the only one. And it's a very viable way to train dogs just based on praise. And in fact, probably in the long run better, because when you're trying to teach dogs to do things, you often want them to do it just because they want to do it, not because they're expecting a treat for doing it. All right, moving on to another area that is relevant for this question about human emotion or dog emotions and the dog-human bond is how do they respond to faces? How do they process our faces? Not just dog faces, but human faces. Do they understand expressions of human emotion? So to study this, we actually just copied an experiment that's commonly done in humans, which is you show pictures to people in the scanner of people, typically just the faces, and compare that to pictures of things like objects, everyday objects, furniture, natural scenes, and scrambled versions of these things. And so you can see some examples here. You can see Callie is in the scanner looking at a picture of a dog looking back at her, and then we're scanning her while that's happening. And what we want to do is understand what parts of the dog brain are there for processing faces. In humans, as well as all primates, there are dedicated parts of the brain that seem to be selectively responsive to faces. And this is not terribly surprising considering how important faces are to us. They convey a huge amount of information. We're very social creatures. So it's no surprise that parts of the brain are dedicated to this. The question is, for an animal like a dog, do they have dedicated parts of their brain for processing faces? And the answer is yes, they do. We called it the dog face area, abbreviated DFA, and the colored dots show the location of the area that we found that responds selectively to faces. And you can see here in this bar chart, the upper bar chart shows the response to in these regions to faces as being greater than the response to objects and scenes. And that's in contrast to a slightly different area. These are slightly different locations. This is an area, what we call primary visual cortex, abbreviated V1, which responds to everything. And that's true really of all our brains. It's the first area, which happens to be in the back of the head, where the visual information comes in, and it just lights up when you see something. It's not terribly specific, unlike the face area. So this shows that, in fact, like humans, dogs do have parts of their brain that seem relatively specific to faces. We don't know if it's because they've evolved that way. It could reflect a common ancestor, a common evolutionary pathway in mammalian evolution, or it could just be because they've grown up around humans and they're used to looking at us just like we're used to looking at each other. Either way, it's still important. It shows that faces are important to dogs. So kind of along those lines, what about language? Language is hugely important to us, but what do dogs get out of it? Again, another classic Gary Larson cartoon, what we call in the business, the ginger effect. So for this experiment, we had the owners teach their dogs the names of two objects we gave them. And these were just kind of arbitrary toys or pieces of foam. And they just got names like Eddie had, I think that was Monkey and Piggy. I can't remember what we called those. But anyway, the dogs, it took a very long time. It took like 6 months to teach the dogs the names of these objects. And the way we tested was the dog had to go and retrieve that object or nose it or do something to indicate that they could differentiate between these two just based on the name. And then we bring them into the scanner and we have the owners speak those words that they've taught to the dog. And as a control condition, we use something called pseudo words, which is just gibberish. It's think of the poem Jabberwocky. They are words that sound like English words, but that have no meaning. And this is a classic experiment in human language processing. When you do this with humans, what you find is that the language parts of the brain activate to words, but not these pseudo words or gibberish words. It's because we recognize that they don't have meaning, and then we just kind of stop processing them. When we did this with the dogs, though, we found exactly the opposite. So these areas of the brain here, this is looking at the side of the dog's brain here, in an area that would be called their auditory cortex, and possibly a language area if they have one. We're not really sure because we find that this region responds more strongly to the pseudo words. And what we think is happening is when a dog hears gibberish, initially they don't recognize it as gibberish. It may be a cue to them to try to figure out what the human is trying to communicate. And so it may actually result in augmented attention to that. And this is very different than the way humans process speech. So the last thing that I wanted to close in on, and we've done a lot more experiments than I have time to tell you about, but this is important because when I started this project, I really had no expectations of it. It was just a side project. It was just a crazy idea. I kind of trained my dog to go in the scanner so I can see what she's thinking. It ended up changing my career trajectory, and now it's all that I do, but I've been doing it now for 10 years, and that spans the lifespan. That is the lifespan of many dogs. And so the dogs who've started the project have aged, and sadly, we've lost many of them to the things that dogs die from. And this has become a lifetime project, and we've been imaging them, developing the diseases that dogs get, which is mainly cancer. So I want to show you what the possibilities are here. Because the dogs have been trained for MRI, it is incredibly simple. If a dog has an ailment, something wrong with them, the owner just brings them in, they just climb in the scanner, and instead of scanning the brain, we scan some other part of their body, whatever we need to do. To give you an idea of how this plays out, so this is Libby when she started the project in 2013. This was Libby a year or two ago. I mean, it's sad, but this dog's age. Libby was what we call a lumpy dog. She had lots of lipomas on her body, and so we can scan that. And the crosshairs are on that, so we can do, like I said, any part of the body. This dog's name is Kirby. Kirby has epilepsy, and the owner volunteered, I think, primarily just because she wanted an MRI of the dog. He was not the easiest dog to train, but we finally got him through it. And when we looked at his brain, we noticed that his ventricles were quite large. That's the space in the middle. That is often seen in human epilepsy as well. We don't know if it's because repeated seizures causes atrophy of the brain, or whether he was born that way and that led to it. But it points out that we can use the brain imaging for other things besides just studying cognition. This dog's name is Stella. She had been in the project for a very long time. And one day, after one of our sessions, the owner said, Stella had a nosebleed this weekend. And so it's like, okay, well, let's just go back in the scanner and I'll scan her nose instead of her brain. Unfortunately, what we found is this side of her nose was completely socked in. It should not look like that. It should look like the black. Turned out that was a nasal carcinoma, a tumor. We were able, because we found this, she went to University of Georgia for radiation treatment. That's why she's lost all the hair here. So we were able to get her into treatment. And because she was trained for the MRI, we could scan her after her radiation sessions, and we were able to track the regression of her tumor, which would have been impossible had she not been trained for this. And then this is Jack, golden retriever. He also had been in the project a very long time, and we had been scanning through his whole life. Unfortunately, when he was 12, he also had a seizure. A first-time seizure in a 12-year-old dog is almost always a brain tumor. And so we scanned him, and indeed, you can see these bright spots here and here showing the development of the tumor. What's interesting is this was actually present. I didn't know it at the time we did the scan. It was actually present before he had his seizure. And it just starts to kind of point to the possibilities of having these dogs trained, that it makes it much easier to do these diagnostic things, that we can track diseases and maybe even intervene before they become so symptomatic that it's too late to do anything. So the last thing I'll leave you with is, I often get questions about, dog breeds or male versus females. And I will tell you, all the dogs are individuals. Every response that they have is idiosyncratic to themselves. They are just like people. They are as different from each other as people are in these studies. And so we come back to the question I started with, is, do dogs love us? The answer, I think, is yes. In their way, they do. The response to social praise and the social bond itself is proof enough for me. So I will leave it there. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Berns. It was so enlightening. I learned so much information. It was wonderful. I had a couple questions, and I see that there's some questions in the actual Q&A box. So if anyone has questions for Dr. Berns, I'm going to be moderating the Q&A box. So please put your questions there, not in the chat box. I had a question. I noticed in your introduction, we had talked a little bit about success of a service dog. So how does your research actually help predict if a dog can or may be successful as a service dog?
Yeah, so I didn't have time to go into that study, but one of the things that we've done along the way was we partnered with a service dog training organization called Canine Companions. And the idea was, could we use this tool to predict whether a dog would actually become a good service dog? Because there's a lot of resources and time and effort go into training these dogs, and the success rate is generally not that high. Maybe about a third of the dogs will actually succeed. And so what we did was we constructed a simulator at CCI's campus in California, and their trainers taught their dogs how to go in the MRI. those dogs were very easy to train. And then our team would fly out to California. We actually did the scanning at Berkeley. And this was when the dogs were adolescents. So they were about between 15 and 18 months old. And so we did exactly the experiment I showed at the beginning, which was these hand signal experiments, just this and this hand signal, but under two conditions. One condition was with their trainer handler giving the signals, and then the other with a stranger, one of us whom the dogs didn't know, giving those signals. And the idea was how they respond to a new person might be predictive of how they would respond in an environment where they have to actually transfer everything they've learned to a person that they're being paired with. And what we actually found was that the dogs who had a response in a particular part of their brain called the amygdala, which is often associated with arousal of some sort, can be negative oftentimes, but not always, turned out to be not good candidates, because in the end, several months later, 6 months later, they washed out of the training program. And so what we were finding is that even though these dogs were doing everything that they were told to do, they go in the scanner, they hold still just like all the other dogs, there was a measure internally that suggested they were a little bit jacked up. Some of it might have been anxiety, some of it might just have been excitement. Either way, though, neither was a good trait for a service dog. And we found that with about 85% accuracy, we could say whether that dog would succeed or not.
Very interesting. Yeah, because it's so expensive to train those dogs. You know, and if you're able to predict the success while you're young, I could see it saving a lot of money and time for the nonprofit. So thank you for that. Yeah, I was interested in that. So I'm going to turn it over to some questions from the people that are actually watching and listening to you today. And the first one is, were you able to construct an experiment to find out if human faces were any more or less important to a dog than a dog's face?
Excellent question. We haven't done that. So in our initial study with the face processing, we didn't have enough dogs or perhaps enough trials to tell if there was a difference. We just saw there was a face processing area responded both to dog faces and human faces. Now, there have subsequently been a few other groups around the world that have started doing this as well. And there's at least one report that says that there might be two areas kind of next to each other in the dog's brain. One that seems a little more responsive to human faces and another more to dog faces. I take that with a grain of salt because that's not generally how it's been observed in other animals. There's just like a face area and then that's it. So I say the jury is out on that right now. Okay.
This next question is, did you try to make the sound of the gibberish similar to the real world in terms of phonetic similarities?
Yes, good question. That is how we construct the gibberish. So you take the words that the people were using for their named objects, you take the phonemes from that, and you essentially just kind of mix up the phonemes that are already being used. So you just rearrange them. So it does sound like English, but without meaning.
Okay, the next question is, what are your opinions on social media, in quotation marks, talking dogs, for example, Bunny and Stella?
I'm not sure I know. I know Loki, the husky, maybe. I'm not sure where that question's going.
Okay, we'll go on to the next question. Any noticeable differences among breeds, for example, German Shepherds, etc.?
It's very hard to answer the breed question because there are so many breeds. There's over 100 breeds out there. And you would need a good sampling, at least from a couple different breeds to make any statement about breed differences. Now, the problem we have is that the dogs in our project are essentially self-selected, or they're owner selected, right? So we have a tryout process. We don't discriminate based on breed. And I will tell you that we take dogs, it's anywhere from about 18 pounds on up. The largest dog we've scanned is a Great Pyrenees, who was very large, probably too large for his own good, about 120 pounds. So as long as they can do the process and be comfortable in the scanner, we'll take them. that seems to skew though towards certain breeds. And I'm not sure it's whether it's the breeds or the owners who like those breeds. So for example, we have, I don't know that we've ever had a German Shepherd go through this. We've had a couple try, but for whatever reason, the people who have German Shepherds are not interested in participating in this project. So we have an overrepresentation of retrievers, for example. We have a lot of Goldens, a lot of Labs, although lately we've had a lot of shelter dogs. So when you're talking about breeds, it's not clear cut. You'd have to do some kind of genetic testing. But what I will tell you to give you an answer of some sort is the study that we did with canine companions was effectively all the same breed. Those were all hybrids of golden retrievers and Labrador retrievers. And so we had 50 of those dogs, and they literally looked like clones physically. And yet there was as much variation in the brain responses amongst those 50 dogs as we see of dogs across breeds. So I'm convinced that there's a lot of variation going on. It's more of an individual variation. The breed component may be a little bit of it, but I don't think it's the major one. I think there's enough variation even within breeds to count for what we're seeing.
Okay, we had another question about breeds, but I think you answered that one as well. So the next question is, how do they train dogs to sniff out COVID and cancer?
Oh, I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer that. So the COVID one's interesting because I had thought about dabbling in it for a bit. There are a couple of groups who are trying to train COVID sniffing dogs. The problem with the COVID projects is that they typically would use sweat or some kind of bodily secretion from someone who has or has recently had COVID. The studies that I've seen have compared that to essentially someone who hasn't had it or is healthy. And it's not clear that the dogs are picking up coronavirus or whether it's just that the person was sick. Those studies I don't think have been done yet. So you would need to compare that to someone who is equivalently sick with a fever and whatever symptoms they have to know for sure that the dogs are actually picking up coronavirus as opposed to just some generic marker of sickness. Same is true for cancer detection. It's very unclear what exactly the dogs are potentially picking up. Is it something specific to a malignant cell, or is it something in the body's response to that, in which case it makes it more confusing. So we don't know.
Okay, the next question is there a correlation between smarter dogs loving more or having more of a capacity for a deeper relationship?
Well, I guess my way of answering that is there's no agreed upon measure of dog smartness. There's no dog IQ test. The things that you've seen out there that rank dog breeds by intelligence, that's not based on anything empirical, really. And the folks who are doing testing of various dog breeds, I haven't seen anything that correlates with dog breeds. There is a little bit of data that suggests that there may be correlations to some aspects of intelligence with brain size. But again, this is controversial. So I don't think that we have a ready answer to that, or even kind of the question of love or emotional bonding, whether that's has anything to do with what we would define as intelligence.
Okay, next question is, I noticed that most of the scans have been on larger dogs. Have you been able to scan smaller breeds like Chihuahuas?
As I said, probably about the smallest we can go is about 18 pounds. Although I take that back. We did recently scan a pair of rat terriers who barely pushed probably 12 pounds. It's not so much the physical size. The problem is as the dog gets smaller, their brain gets really small. So it makes that target very hard. And so it's probably not worth our time to study very small dogs. Chihuahuas, of course, have outsized heads. And we've had a few go through our tryouts, but I haven't met a Chihuahua yet that I thought I was confident could do this.
Okay, thank you for that response. So I have someone that is talking about a personal experience. They write, I have a dog who almost from day one loved to sit and just gaze softly into my eyes for about 5 to 10 minutes if I let him do it. It seems that he's trying to understand me better or show me his love. I never had another dog do that. What do you think this means? This dog seems much closer to me than the others I've had.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. It unfortunately kind of falls into the category of I don't know. These are the kinds of questions that motivated me to start this project with my own dog. My favorite dog used to just kind of sleep in the crook of my arm, and I wondered, is that because he loves me or he just likes the warmth there? This is why we're doing it, to answer questions like that.
Right. Okay, great. And so were the faces used random or were they familiar to the dog?
Those were unfamiliar to the dogs. Those were taken from a standard stimulus set that's used in human studies.
Okay. All right. I'm sorry, I'm having some difficulty with my Zoom. Hang on a second. Let me go back to the Q&A. Okay. Why do some dogs recognize things on TV and others don't seem to see it at all?
Great question. This is something we've been struggling with as well. So there may be many answers. It's a huge issue for us because the more complicated studies that we're now doing require the dogs to watch video images or things we project on a screen. So it's a problem if the dogs are not clear if they're not seeing it or they're not paying attention to it. One of the issues that we think is at play is what's called refresh rate. So back in the old days, if you're as old as I am, you remember CRT screens, the old style TVs. They would refresh the screen every 30 times a second. Dogs, cats as well, seem to have what's called a higher flicker fusion rate, meaning that when things are refreshed at that rate, they probably see flickering images. Humans tend to just fuse the images and we don't notice the flickering as much. Dogs and cats, it probably has to refresh much faster. So it's possible that when the dog is looking at a video screen, they're seeing flickering images and it's not, they might not see it very well. The other possibility, which I also think is probably the more salient issue, is that when a dog's looking at a screen, they just see what's in front of them, a small image. We humans kind of seamlessly know that, when you see a picture of me or you see a picture of a dog or a horse on the screen, you immediately equate that with the real thing. We don't know that the dog or frankly any other animal does that. They can discriminate things on the screen, but if they see a picture of another dog, do they know that it's a dog? Or to them, it's just like this little thing right in front of them. So what is that? They may not make that equivalence. And so maybe some dogs do. It wouldn't surprise me because we see a lot of this variation.
Okay. The next question is, the host mentioned a tiger being scanned. Can you tell us a little more about that experience?
Tasmanian tiger, also known as the thylacine. So the Tasmanian tiger is or was a marsupial native to Australia and then ultimately Tasmania, the island south of Australia, that lived until approximately 1936 when the last known one died in a zoo. If you look them up on the internet, you'll see that they look very dog-like, except they have stripes on their back. That's why they're called tigers. They're not tigers. They're marsupials. So I became obsessed with them when I saw this and wanted to know what are their brains like. But they're extinct. So I went on a search around the world looking for any existing brain specimens of them. And it turns out there's 4 left in the world. One is in the Smithsonian, and they were kind enough to lend it to me to scan. So I don't want to spend time talking about that. That's actually in my book, What It's Like to Be a Dog. There's a couple chapters about that venture.
Have you ever scanned a blind dog?
Yeah, Yes, I believe so. I'm sorry, I was just kind of going through in my head all the dogs we've scanned. Yes, to varying degrees. Not a dog that was congenitally blind. So most of the dogs, the two dogs I'm thinking of, they had lost their vision later in life. And I don't recall that we couldn't do much with them. I think with them, it was mainly probably an olfactory side. The related question I thought where this was going is, have I scanned a deaf dog? And the answer to that is also yes. Congenitally deaf dog who knew, or their owner had taught some rudimentary sign language to communicate with her. She was not the best subject, and so we didn't really get any conclusive answers from her brain because one of the ways that she compensated for being deaf is that she constantly visually scans the environment. So she's constantly, just like looking back and forth, very visually oriented, as you might expect. And so she was never very good at holding still in the scanner. So someday I'd like to come back to that.
Okay, so I think we're going to wrap up. We'll have one more question. Let me just go through. There's a lot of great questions in the Q&A, and I'm sorry we're not going to be able to get to every one. What is the most difficult part of your job as a researcher?
That's a loaded question. So I'll give you an honest answer, and that is getting money to do the research.
I can completely concur. Well, this is fantastic, and I really appreciate your time, Dr. Berns, today, and everyone who has participated in the Q&A, and we look forward to learning more about your work and reading your books. And I think I'm going to go ahead and turn it over now to talk a little bit about an initiative that we have at Florida Atlantic University called C-P.A.W., which stands for Canines Providing Assistance to Wounded Warriors. So I have a short slide deck that I'd just like to share with the audience, and then we can wrap up with some conclusions. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so this is my first slide, For the Love of Dogs, and this is a picture of a dog just looking at the American flag. And why this is important is that the C-P.A.W. initiative is really concentrating on veteran and military and their families and how animals can actually affect their health, their well-being, and also their brain health. So Canines Providing Assistance to Wounded Warriors. I'm the founding director. Again, my name is Cheryl Krause-Parello. I'm in the College of Nursing at the Boca Raton campus, and I founded C-P.A.W. in 2013. And I have a picture of my undergraduate research assistants. From left to right is Emma Meyer, Juliana Morano, and Gabby Nava. We're a small group, but we're a mighty group, and we get a lot done, and I'm really proud to be working with such wonderful women. So a little bit about C-P.A.W. C-P.A.W. is a health research initiative for veterans and the United States Armed Forces. What we try to do is advance the health and well-being of veterans and active duty service members through research, education, and public policy making. Again, we are housed in the Christine E. Lynn College of Nursing in the Boca Raton campus. And if you want to learn more about us, you can just search us on the FAU website, C-P.A.W.W. So what we do, we really try to advance interdisciplinary research and education. So coming from a nursing discipline, I always like to bring in folks from other disciplines like social work, psychology, veterinary medicine, you name it. We really want to be all-inclusive and really help advance the human-animal interaction research that's going on in the United States and really throughout the world. We also advocate for evidence-based interventions and practice protocols, and we're really committed to building community partnerships to support military-related health initiatives. We really think about, went too fast, let me back up. We aim to work with veterans in the community and also think about ways that we can have meaningful culturally congruent projects and partnerships, not only with veterans in Florida, but also across the United States. And why is this important? It's important because veterans, for the most part, may be struggling when they're reintegrating into civilian life. And veterans can also face mental health challenges due to their service to this country. Some of those things can include post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, depression, and unfortunately suicide. And statistics show that approximately 20 veterans die by suicide every day, but unfortunately that number seems to be underreported because the way that that statistic is calculated is based on death certificates, and not all death certificates people will check the box that they were a veteran. So we're estimating that approximately 20 veterans take their life to suicide each day, and the C-P.A.W. program is really, feels very committed that one veteran's life lost to suicide is one too many, and we're trying to make a difference. And we hope that, as a community, we can work on this together to reduce the suicide rate. And veterans make up about 18% of all suicide deaths in the United States. So how do we do this? Again, I introduced you to 3 of my undergraduate research assistants and myself. We do this through community engagement and partnerships. We do this through philanthropy and donations, and we do this through project grants. And it is difficult, as our keynote speaker, Dr. Berns, talked about. Funding is a major issue when it comes to human-animal interaction research. There doesn't seem to be as much funding opportunity as there are for other types of research projects, but we're, again, a strong and mighty group, and we always try to find ways to connect our veterans with the services they need. And if that includes human-animal interaction, then we try to reach out to our community partners and kind of work together to help them receive, for example, an intervention or a companion animal, a emotional support dog, or even a service dog if their symptoms, are severe enough that they feel that would help them reintegrate into society in a positive way. So our research reaches veterans across the country, again, not in just South Florida, but we have projects going on in multiple states. Right now we have projects in New York and in Georgia. We also have projects in Texas, and we're going to be doing some new projects in South Carolina and New Jersey. And basically C-P.A.W.'s reach is nationwide, and also we do have relationships with some of the scientists in the United Kingdom. And so this is just a slide, a little bit about some of our community engagement projects. We have a full website that is very detailed and has a lot of good information for community, and also some research modules on the research process that veterans can take for free, and also their family members. So one of the studies that we're working on right now is an NIH-funded study, and we are actually working with veterans who have been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, and we're asking them to train a service animal for another veteran, and it's an 8-week intervention study. And in this study, they're either randomized to the actual training, or we have a control group that will be looking at and watching training videos for the same duration of an 8-week program. And we're measuring not only psychological markers, but we're also doing biological markers such as salivary cortisol, alpha amylase, telomere length analysis, and a few other biologics. The second study that I wanted to just briefly talk about is a study that we have in review. It was a resubmission, and we're really looking at how veterans across time, what types of dogs help them with their mental health and wellness outcomes. And so we would be starting this project most likely next summer, and the C-P.A.W. website has information about research opportunities that people can get involved with as participants, but also opportunities that they can come on board to be team members, because we really, like our keynote speaker said, the dogs are part of the team, and we really appreciate having veterans actually be part of the research team, not being only for participants. So if you go on our website and you are a veteran and you're interested in any of our projects, please feel free to contact one of the team members. And one project that we have in development right now, which we're really excited about, if this was funded, this would start next fall. And it's looking at the efficacy of a storytelling program for older veterans in the community and undergraduate students, where they would come together and actually create a digital story about their military experience and their relationship to their animal. And so veterans in this study would be 65 years and older and actually cohabit with a dog. And so if any of these studies seem interesting to you, or if you know someone, please again have them, check out our C-P.A.W. Facebook page or our website for all these fun and exciting opportunities that we have going on in the community with our veterans and our dogs. And so this is just a slide depicting some of the things that we work on, not only animal-assisted interventions, but we also look at veteran-centered projects where veterans are actually leading projects for us in different states across the United States. And we also try very hard to build community and develop resources for veterans so we can kind of, if someone contacts us, we can be a point of contact where we can say, okay, well, we have someone, for example, in North Florida that's training service animals, and you may be interested in signing up for their program. So we try to be an advocate for the veterans in the community, and we really are proud to serve those who have served us. And so if you'd like to learn more about C-P.A.W., the website's there, but you can also go ahead and just, search C-P.A.W. in the search button on the FAU website. And this is just the references from our the pictures that you saw in the PowerPoint slide. So I'm happy to take any questions if anyone has them. If not, and you think of something or you're interested in getting involved with us, please feel free to email us at cpaw@health.fau.edu or give us a call.
Great, thank you, Doctor. And thank you to Dr. Berns and Dr. Krause-Parello. I do have one question for you. What breeds do you think are best for the needs of our veterans?
It's very similar to the response that Dr. Berns gave us. There's not a one size fits all because every veteran is different and every dog is different. And so it's really, I think the person really and the dog have to find each other. We've worked with dogs in shelters and had veterans actually do a dog walk program. And you never know what dog is going to connect with that veteran and what veteran's going to connect with that dog. And so I know that there are a lot of service dog agencies that use, the mixed breeds that we had talked about earlier, the golden retrievers, et cetera. But, dogs are good for the soul. And so any dog that you find that fills your heart with joy and you fill their heart with joy, I say that's the match.
Very cool. Thank you very much. Yeah, I always felt comfortable with Shih Tzus, but I don't know.
Yeah, my breed's Dachshund. I've had them since I was 4 years old. So, that's just my breed, but I love all breeds, but they're my favorite breed for me.
Oh, that's so cool. Do they have any evidence on what the intelligence level of these different breeds are? We're learning so much about dogs through all of this research and wonderful programs going on. Anything about frontal cortex?
I'm going to have to defer to Dr. Berns for that one.
Cool. Well, thank you both very, very much. Dr. Berns, did you want to say something on that?
No, the breed intelligence question it's a hot potato and it's probably not worth going there.
Yeah, you mentioned that earlier. Thank you both so very much for participating in our inaugural 2021 Brainy Days series. So we really appreciate both of you being here.
Thank you. It was super fun.
Oh, good. I'm glad. And I also want to thank our audience and everyone out there who's still listening. We'd love for you all to join us again. We have a Brainy Days calendar that you can easily access online. You can find the full calendar list at our website under our community tab at the FAU Brain Institute. So we hope that you'll join us next time. The first is this coming Thursday. Thank you.